The Internet Aristocracy. We are, right now, seeing the rise of a new privileged class on the internet. An incredibly well-paid and protected yet small minority of content creators. The recent Twitch leaks, of course, confirms this, but we've all known for some time that some are more equal than others. A wonderful example is, of course, that of famous internet socialist Hassan Piker. It took a mainstream news segment highlighting the rich socialist's remark to eventually get Twitch to suspend him for 1 week. Whereas the usual punishment for, quote, glorifying terrorism or otherwise suggesting that terrorists were somehow justified in bombing something or someone is an immediate and permanent ban. Or, well, actually, the punishment today is much stricter, as Twitch reserves the right to police your behavior offline as well as what you say and do on their platform, and can also report you to the police for actions it considers to be serious. Incidentally, a 1-week suspension is the same punishment you can get on YouTube for putting Miranda's fully clothed ass in a thumbnail. I know, I've tried. Now, you could possibly just notch this up to incompetent moderation and good old-fashioned favoritism, something Twitch has had plentiful problems with over the years. For example, this warrants a suspension for overly sexualized clothing, whereas this is all hunky-dory, no problems whatsoever. However, with the recent reveal of the Do Not Ban list, we have yet another confirmation of the apparent fact that there is a class system in place on the Twitch platform, and indeed, most platforms, it would seem. It's been a poorly kept secret at best for years now, with another big example, of course, being Twitter. The company set the record straight back in 2018, explaining that they had no shadow banning system or anything like it. In fact, they didn't even know what shadow banning was. They had to go looking for a definition. Poor little Twitter. And then, of course, they had snapshots of their admin's back end leaking, showing what appears to be a series of tools and tags, quite obviously meant to allow moderators to shadow ban people, to bar them from getting to the trending tab, and generally speaking, growing organically, along the same lines as, supposedly, everyone else. Whoopsie. Facebook has its own system in place as well for advantaging some users over others. It has a list of users called cross-check, with celebrities, politicians, and other, quote, high-profile users, whom, by the way, is anyone that Facebook moderators choose to add to the list. These privileged and favored aristocrats are shielded from the laws of the land and cannot be banned even if they blatantly and repeatedly break Facebook's terms of service, unless someone higher up on the Facebook food chain approves the ban. And the best part about cross-check is that this whole kicking it up the ladder approach, well, there was no one at the top of the ladder willing to actually make the decisions, meaning that the whitelist was essentially a fully fledged permission to do whatever any one of the privileged few wanted on Facebook's various platforms. One of the more extreme examples happened on Instagram, where a famous footballer shared not only private conversations between himself and a woman, but also her nude photos. This was in response to the woman accusing the footballer of raping her, accusations that turned out to be false. And good on the man for doing that as well. Granted, leaking nude pictures might be one step too far, but standing up for yourself against a clearly malicious attempt to have you accused of rape is nothing if not admirable. My only complaint is that if Joe Nobody gets accused of this, their account would simply just disappear. And then, of course, there is YouTube, the Google-owned monolith which services fully 1/3 of the entire planet's population on a monthly basis. And with great power comes, of course, great responsibility. The responsibility to separate the peasantry from the favored elites. YouTube's current CEO, Susan Wojcicki, has made it clear for all willing to hear that she will artificially push the correct interpretation of events on YouTube by the so-called authoritative sources. They are 10 times more likely to be suggested by YouTube for news events, 14 times more likely for election coverage, and 20 times more likely on Voldemort virus coverage. And just in case you are unaware of why I refer to COVID as the Voldemort virus, well, it's because that for a time, even just mentioning it would see your video yeeted off the internet quicker than you could say Stasi. But naturally, it does not end there. YouTube also made a Black Creators Only Racial Fund of $100 million to be given out exclusively to those with the correct quantity of melanin in their skin. For everyone else unfortunate enough to be born wrong, you're simply going to have to struggle and compete like all the other second-class citizens. Just pray you don't become a third-class citizen, like me and several of my acquaintances. Allow me to regale you with a couple of anecdotes. I have seen my own recommendations numbers, that is the amount of time that YouTube shows my videos to other people in the sidebar of other YouTube videos, drop by more than half from one month to the other. My good friend Sargon has had it even worse than that, as he was well on his way to 1 million subscribers on his original channel, when suddenly, overnight, his subscribers' numbers turned into a trickle. After also getting demonetized, he eventually had to abandon his channel and move on to new things, with his latest endeavor being, of course, the wildly successful Lotus Eaters podcasts. Another even more blatant example was, of course, what happened to Count Dankula. I've heard the story from the man personally about how no matter what he uploaded, it would be demonetized immediately, including a video of his dogs playing until one day, Ethan from H3H3 sent him a DM asking if he wanted his monetization back. And, like magic, after presumably a quick phone call to Susan, simsalabim, Dankula had his monetization back. Just like in the good old feudal times, having friends in high places can work absolute miracles. But maybe you think I'm still being hyperbolic, calling them an aristocracy. Clearly that's too far, right? Well, let's look at what we've talked about already. We have here a group of people that are elevated above the law that the common men must follow. They can only, in fact, be prosecuted by the king, the platform itself. And even when they violate the rules, more often than not, the platform simply ignores it. And even when the king is forced to act by the mass outcry of the plebeian rabble, as with the case of Hassan America Deserved 9/11 Piker, whom after days of general outcry by pretty much everyone, including the mainstream media, Twitch was forced, the king, was forced to deliver a slap on the wrist in the form of a 1-week suspension. And as if being immune to the law of the land was not enough, if you belong to the proper groups, you are also not only just given free money, you are given your own dedicated YouTube partner manager. You are given access to YouTube's personnel, training, workshops, and networking opportunities alongside other perks as well. And then there is the obvious benefit of being allowed to say what everyone else isn't. Besides even just the straight up pushing of certain sources, like we saw with YouTube being 14 to 20 times more likely to suggest the correct news sources, you also have the advantage of being able to do what people used to do back in the day. If you remember the early days of YouTube, the content that often grew the quickest was the controversial content, the spicy content, the interesting and weird and strange content. Well, today, you're free to have a spicy take on YouTube, just as YouTube is free to remove you permanently from their platform. Having a controversial opinion today puts your entire channel and potentially your livelihood at risk. Small coincidence that a lot of content creators have begun to self-censor, which again gives a massive advantage to those who are above and beyond the terms of service. They can say what everyone else is afraid to say. They can do the things that everyone else is afraid to do, and unsurprisingly, that'll bring in an audience. And along with the audience, of course, comes another key ingredient in a thriving aristocracy: financial power, preferably focused in as few hands as possible. And unsurprisingly, the Twitch leaks demonstrate that that is exactly what is happening. Out of some 9.2 million monthly active streamers, only the top 10,000 earn a solid income of $15,000 or above dollars. In fact, a significant number of them earn less than that again. So what you have there is the top 10,000 streamers. That is 0.1% of the total number of streamers. These people are already not just the 1%, but the 0.1%. And out of them, again, the people who earn the biggest bucks, $1 million or so a year, that's the 0.0001% of Twitch streamers. And the worst part of it all is that this should not surprise anyone. In fact, it is the near unavoidable consequence of our current day social media and video sharing site systems, where you have the platform, the king, standing at the absolute zenith, able to dictate laws and regulations via their terms of service with absolute complete immunity. They can do whatever they want. Oh, you can choose to not abide by their rules, but they'll simply just remove you from their platform. What's one viewer? What's one content creator out of 2+ billion people? And if you're already earning a living off YouTube, if you are a content creator, they can take away your livelihood with the push of a button. And they will never even have to justify themselves to you or anyone else. These are some of the least regulated industries in the world, quite probably the least regulated industries. And even the occasional piece of legislation or regulation that is in place to try and constrain their power, well, usually they're simply just ignored, and blatantly so as well. Section 230, for example, is supposed to make sure that these platforms must act like platforms rather than as publishers, by denying them the ability to have an editorial agenda. A site like YouTube should simply just host anything and everything, and in return, they are protected from legal liabilities if something posted on their platform is illegal. Whereas in reality, of course, YouTube has 4 different pages of things which they will editorialize. They will remove misinformation. They will remove election misinformation. They will remove COVID misinformation and vaccine misinformation. What is and isn't misinformation at any given point in time will of course be determined by YouTube. In other words, they will have an editorial stance on what does and does not qualify. This editorial policy has in turn led to no end of trouble for Google. As it turns out, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And so in certain cases, they are being sued by nations for not deleting content quickly enough. If you have an editorial policy, YouTube, then we demand you employ it the way we want to, while simultaneously they are also being sued for having an editorial policy as well. I've said many times that this never needed to happen and that YouTube should simply have remained a neutral platform, but that ship has long since sailed, and it is the platform's own fault. So I'm certainly not going to be showing them any sympathy for that. But we're getting slightly off topic, returning to the idea of the internet aristocracy. Because this, of course, has a much larger and more important point, rather than just telling us what we already know, namely that the world is a bloody unfair place, and social media and video sharing sites even more so than most areas. No, the bigger problem here is that as we see more and more service jobs begin to be automated and we are heading towards a general age of automation, we need alternative jobs. And content creator is one of the most promising alternative jobs out there, as manga has so thoroughly demonstrated by absolutely trouncing the Western comic market. Being able to offer various products of various types and flavors to various people is a great business model. Ideally, there should be something on YouTube for literally everyone, no matter how niche or specific it might be. There might be 2,000 channels all talking about knives, but each and every one of them does so from a slightly different perspective to attract a slightly different audience. And these differences can be as slight as personality, favored jokes, camera setup, presentation, or the things that they choose to pay particular attention to. In many ways, this is what we already have, with an absolute ton of different content creators. But where we immediately start running into problems is when we look again at the Twitch leaks. 9.2 million creators, only 10,000 of which earn a living wage. Now, of course, living wage will differ depending upon where you're from, your economic situation, etc., etc. Yet nevertheless, the problem we see here is then exacerbated by the fact that the top percentage also play by different rules. We therefore end up in a situation where the 0.001% are always going to draw a bigger audience. They can talk about things that everyone else can't. They get more artificial push than the other channels like the mainstream media does, and I can guarantee you individual content creators are also receiving that treatment, definitely on Twitch and probably on other platforms as well. This means that the rich, well, they get a lot richer. On platforms where competition is already incredibly tough, getting an audience and getting going with YouTube or Twitch or anything else is very, very hard. And already a vanishingly small percentage of people make it into any kind of stability or success. If this system continues to go the way it's currently going, the logical conclusion is that the very biggest will continue to grow larger, as their advantages will continue to stack over time. They'll be able to cover more controversial content more times. They'll be able to avoid bans more times. They will simply be able to use these smaller advantages again and again and again to stack on the percentages. Until eventually we will have a few absolutely ginormous content creators and billions of tiny creators who will try YouTube, be unable to gain any sort of traction because all of the traffic is being funneled towards the big boys, and give up, losing us that potential alternative job. Now, unfortunately, there's no simple solution to any of this, or, well, not comprehensive solutions anyway. A nice place to start would be to simply just deregulate the platforms. Make it very, very simple. If it's legal in the main country, in the case of Google that would be America, then It's legal, no matter what, no matter where. And if they actually enforce this program, I can also guarantee you that even if local legislators would want to try and bring down their own hammers on Google, trying, for example, in Germany to enforce hate speech laws, they would have a much, much harder time of it if Google was actually a genuinely neutral company. The outcry would be massive, and the PR nightmare for the party trying to do it would be catastrophic, as they would be unquestionably the enemies of free speech. Whereas now, it's just censors fighting censors, isn't it? There's no moral high ground in sight anywhere. But again, the problem would be far more complicated than that, as the rich getting richer, well, it's kind of an unavoidable problem in many ways, at the very least in the short term. As a YouTuber, for example, grows large, he's going to get more views on the video. The algorithm is going to see that this video is popular, and so push it onto the trending tab perhaps, or advise more people to go watch it, resulting in yet more views, which might result in the next video getting even more views, and so on and so on. And to be fair as well, this in many ways is how the system should work. If you make something popular, YouTube should try and show it to as many people as possible. If anything, the only change, quote unquote, that needs doing is that this cycle should be much quicker. It should try to show more content to more people, and of different types of content as well. You like this? Okay, how about you try this? Maybe even have its own tabs for other suggestions, maybe. Again, these would undoubtedly come with their own caveats as well. And there's no simple solution to this quote-unquote problem, and there certainly isn't an algorithmic solution. If anything, less algorithm would probably be beneficial to more people, as of course you can also gain a huge advantage if you simply know how to game the algorithm. The question then is whether or not you can be bothered, or if you are willing to do the certain tactics that are required. For example, I have a tool in the back end of my YouTube that gives me an idea of what is currently popular by ranking it based upon numbers, essentially attributing a score to certain tags, and saying, okay, this tag is worth X amount of points, and therefore you should choose this tag over another tag. Now, immediately, the problems appear, doesn't it? You could pick a higher ranked tag and it will help you with the algorithm, even if the tag has absolutely no connection with your video whatsoever. Theoretically, this is a terms of service violation, but it's one of those laws that are never enforced. In fact, back in the day, many YouTubers grew to the size they are today by adding in PewDiePie in their own tags, even if they didn't talk about PewDiePie or mention him or even do PewDiePie-esque things, simply because he was one of the biggest search words at the time. Another popular one is top 10s or top 5 lists. Those are near universally weighted higher than anything else. Or question mark titles. What if this happened? What if that happened? Again, even if the video has precious little to do with any of this, these are things the algorithm likes, and therefore good ways to grow quickly by pleasing the king. And speaking of cringeworthy shit that pleases YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Or actually, I don't even care about the subscription, but liking and commenting a video is probably the most helpful things you as the viewer can do to help me become an aristocrat as well. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.